Welcome to the Politico. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. The world is holding its breath. In a dizzying turn, the United States has shattered decades of international norms. A secret military raid in Venezuela has toppled its government, while bold threats have been made against Greenland, a territory of a key NATO ally. These actions, unfolding in early 2026, have sent shockwaves across the globe. Alliances once unbreakable now show deep strain. The very foundations of the post-war global order are being tested, leaving nations and citizens to wonder what comes next. The United States, under President Trump, is asserting power in the Western Hemisphere with a new, aggressive doctrine. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney faces a treacherous path between alliance and opposition. As America's closest neighbor, Canada's position is uniquely precarious. The crisis spotlights the delicate balance of power in North America and beyond, raising questions about sovereignty and the future of military alliances. The world is watching to see if diplomacy can prevail over force, as the risk of miscalculation could lead to a wider conflict. Understanding why Carney's stand matters requires a closer look at the events that brought us to this critical moment. The US-Venezuela relationship has been fraught for over 2 decades, rooted in ideological clashes and control over Venezuela's vast oil reserves. Under Chavez and Maduro, Venezuela's socialist agenda clashed with US interests. The US accused the Venezuelan government of corruption, human rights abuses, and drug trafficking. Years of sanctions and failed diplomacy led to a severe humanitarian crisis, with millions facing shortages of food and medicine. The opposition was fractured and suppressed, with key figures detained or seeking international support. The US maintained that Maduro's regime threatened regional stability and national security, citing narco-terrorism as justification for a hardline stance. High-ranking Venezuelan officials were accused of conspiring with drug cartels, laying the groundwork for direct military intervention. Before the raid, the US escalated anti-drug operations, seizing a Russian-flagged oil tanker linked to Venezuela. Years of stalemate and economic collapse created a powder keg in South America. All it needed was a spark, and that came with a covert US military operation. The mission toppled Maduro's government, changing Venezuela's fate overnight. The world watched as the conflict moved from sanctions to military action. The consequences would ripple far beyond Venezuela's borders. The stage was set for a new era of uncertainty in the Americas. As tensions rose in the south, a new front opened in the far north. Greenland, an autonomous territory within Denmark, has become a focal point of global competition. Its strategic location between the Arctic and Atlantic is increasingly valuable as polar ice melts, opening new shipping routes and access to untapped resources. The US has long maintained a military presence at Thule Air Base, but President Trump's ambitions go further. Greenland's vast deposits of critical minerals are essential for modern technology and national security. Reducing reliance on China for these resources is a key US goal. Trump's renewed push to acquire Greenland has shifted from a real estate fantasy to a national security issue, with the White House refusing to rule out military force. The new Donroe Doctrine asserts US dominance in the Western Hemisphere, justifying aggressive actions. Vice President J.D. Vance has pressured European allies, warning the US will act if they fail to secure Greenland. The Arctic, once a region of scientific cooperation, is now a potential flashpoint for military conflict. Denmark and its allies face immense pressure as the stakes rise. The first week of January 2026 saw simmering tensions erupt into direct action. The US launched a secret military operation in Venezuela, capturing President Maduro and his wife, extraditing them to face charges in New York. The bold move, executed without UN or regional approval, plunged Venezuela into uncertainty and triggered global outrage. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez became acting president, quickly recognized by China, Russia, and Iran, who condemned the US action. Rodriguez's government released political prisoners, but the US declared democracy on hold, prioritizing stability. Simultaneously, Trump escalated rhetoric on Greenland, refusing to rule out military force. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen warned, "If the US attacks another NATO country, everything stops, including NATO." The global response was swift and critical. The UN Security Council convened an emergency session, with most members condemning the US. Latin American leaders called for diplomacy, rejecting military intervention. In Washington, the Senate narrowly advanced a resolution to limit the president's war powers, with bipartisan concern over unchecked authority. The crisis exposed deep divisions within the US and among its allies. the world faced a new reality: American power, unchecked and unpredictable. The rules of the international system were being rewritten in real time. The stakes for global stability had never been higher. The world braced for what would come next. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney faced immense pressure as the US challenged the rules-based order Canada champions. In response to threats against Greenland, Carney declared, "We stand with Denmark, we stand with Greenland," signaling solidarity with a fellow NATO ally. By aligning with Denmark, Carney defended national sovereignty and rejected the idea that borders can be redrawn by force. He also acknowledged Canada's deep ties with the US, emphasizing the need for partnership and dialogue. Carney's dual message reassured allies and left room for diplomacy, avoiding rhetoric that could escalate the crisis. His stand reflected growing anxiety among US allies, especially with Trump's past comments about annexing Canada. For Canadians, the threat of US expansionism felt uncomfortably close. Carney's response was about more than Greenland. It was a defense of the principle that might does not make right. His statement asserted Canada's role as a sovereign, principled middle power. The world took note. Canada would not stand idly by as the rules of the international system were threatened. Carney's leadership became a rallying point for those seeking a peaceful, lawful resolution. The crisis tested Canada's resolve and its place on the world stage. The US actions in Venezuela and threats toward Greenland have exposed deep cracks in the global order. NATO, built on collective defense, now faces an unprecedented crisis of trust as allies question the US security guarantee. In Latin America, even critics of Maduro condemn the US intervention, fearing a return to American dominance. The move pushed Venezuela closer to Russia and China, who seized the chance to expand influence in the region. For Canada, the Monroe Doctrine and US posture toward Greenland fueled fears about American intentions. The idea of US expansionism toward Canada, once unthinkable, became a serious concern. Ottawa reassessed its relationship with Washington, and a planned Canadian consulate in Greenland took on new strategic significance. Beyond immediate fallout, these events damaged the concept of a rules-based order. By acting unilaterally, the US signaled it would bypass international law when convenient, setting a dangerous precedent. Other countries may now feel emboldened to do the same, risking a more chaotic world. The long-term consequences for global peace and stability could be profound. Beneath the geopolitical drama are powerful economic motives. In Venezuela, the US seeks to stabilize the country and revive its oil sector, potentially lowering gas prices and reducing rivals' influence. Control over Venezuelan oil would give the US leverage in the global energy market, diminishing OPEC and Russia's power. Secretary of State Rubio's pragmatic approach prioritizes oil flow over immediate democratic transition. In the Arctic, the stakes are future-focused. Greenland's minerals are vital for technology and defense. China currently dominates the supply chain for these resources, giving it strategic leverage. By controlling Greenland, the US could break China's monopoly and secure its own supply. The Monroe Doctrine is about more than regional dominance. It's about winning the economic and technological race of the 21st century. Control of Greenland would give the US a commanding position in a region of growing importance. These economic stakes explain why the Trump administration is willing to risk a major diplomatic crisis. To understand these events, we turn to foreign policy experts. Dr. Evelyn Reed of the Council on Foreign Relations argues the Monroe Doctrine is a radical departure from traditional US diplomacy. The original Monroe Doctrine aimed to keep European powers out of the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine, by contrast, asserts the US right to reshape the hemisphere for its own benefit, even at allies' expense. Applying this doctrine to Greenland, a NATO ally, is especially shocking and could undermine the alliance's credibility. Reed notes the Trump administration views alliances as transactional, useful only when serving immediate US interests. When allies stand in the way, the alliance itself becomes an obstacle. This approach risks isolating the US and undermining global cooperation. Aggressive action may achieve short-term goals, but destroys trust essential for tackling global challenges. The world grows more dangerous when the most powerful nation rewrites the rules. We stand at a pivotal moment in history. The US intervention in Venezuela and threats toward Greenland signal a bold disruptive doctrine, prioritizing unilateral action. The world has been put on notice. The old rules may no longer apply. Leaders like Canada's Mark Carney must balance alliances with defending sovereignty and law. NATO's future is in question as allies grapple with a partner that may also be a threat. The path forward is fraught with risk and complexity. Understanding the history and motivations behind these conflicts is essential for responsible citizenship. The decisions made now will shape the world for generations. The future of the global order is uncertain, but our commitment to understanding and engagement must remain firm. The story is far from over. How it ends will depend, in part, on us.